You know, it's a beautiful thing that James Harden is in Brooklyn in all seriousness. He wanted out of Houston. It's sad to see him leave, particularly the way that he did. But this is a superstar. And what I think people need to remember more than anything is the fact that he doesn't cheat. The guy shows up to play. He doesn't engage in load management, take nights off. That's not who he is. That's not what he's about. Him with KD is lethal. They are the favorites in the Eastern Conference as far as I'm concerned, with Philly and Milwaukee as threats, of course. The Nets and Knicks, next on ESPN.
A beautiful winter Wednesday night in New York City. As this evening we kick off our ESPN NBA doubleheader from Madison Square Garden, where the Brooklyn Nets will face off against the New York Knickerbockers. And welcome you to NBA Courtside, presented by McDonald's. Kevin Durant and the Brooklyn Nets ready to take the court with perhaps a little bit of a distraction as they're getting ready to play their 13th game of this young NBA season. And good evening, everyone, with Doris Burke, Mike Breen on hand, Cassidy Hubbard with us as well. What a wacky league we cover, Doris. It has been unbelievable the last couple of weeks, all the off-court stories that are going on. And, of course, today the big news, the blockbuster trade, as Houston will send James Harden to the Brooklyn Nets. Now, 4 teams are involved. The Nets obviously get Harden and a second-round pick. Houston gets 4 first-round picks, all of them unprotected. Also, 4 pick swaps as well, and they get an excellent player via the Indiana Pacers in Victor Oladipo. Meanwhile, the Cavaliers get a terrific young player in Jarrett Allen, and also Taurean Prince, who was a member of the Nets rotation prior to the trade. And the Pacers get an excellent young player in Karis LeVert, who is doing some good things in the absence of Kyrie Irving. So much to think about in so many different areas in this trade. When you first heard of the trade, Doris, what was your initial reaction?
I thought an already dangerous elite offensive team with championship expectations elevated that championship expectation. You are adding one of the great scorers in the history of the NBA. Only LeBron James has more MVP finishes than James Harden since the time he joined the Houston Rockets. Now, you wonder about the defensive end of the floor. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but greatness usually figures it out, Mike. Who is the guy who is the Chris Bosh or the Ray Allen? Who's the guy who's the third option in that group? We'll see.
All right, let's bring in now Adrian Wojnarowski, of course, who's been all over this trade. Woj, so many different things to ask about this one. Obviously, the first one is, how did this come about over the last 24 hours? What ignited it?
Mike, these teams had been talking for really months since James Harden, told Houston he wanted to trade. He and Kevin Durant were out in L.A. playing. They really came up with this idea together, but it started to get traction here in the last several days. And by last night, when James Harden went up to the podium in Houston after that loss to the Lakers and verbalized his desire to leave and really talking about it being over there, which he hadn't done publicly before, Harden knew that talks had escalated, and I think he was trying to push the Rockets to get the deal done. I think it probably would have happened today anyway, but Brooklyn and the 76ers really down the stretch over the last couple of days, and Brooklyn was just not going to be denied. They really wanted James Harden. They paid a steep price for him.
Woj, you referenced the fact that James basically made the situation in Houston untenable. How much of the Kyrie Irving situation here with the Nets sort of accelerated or maybe put the gas pedal down for the Brooklyn side of things?
It's absolutely a factor, Doris. And I think for Brooklyn, really the most important thing for them, not just trying to win a championship this year with their big 3 now, but longer term. Kevin Durant has come back from this Achilles injury a year off and looks like an MVP again. And remember, he's going to be back up for free agency in a couple of years. They can't be certain what it's going to look like with Kyrie Irving and how this is going to play out. They hope he's back. They hope he buys in. But James Harden coming and certainly wanting to stay long term, he wanted this trade to Brooklyn. It gives them maybe some more insurance that they can secure Kevin Durant. And ideally, it's a 3-player partnership. But at the very least, it will be James Harden and Kevin Durant.
All right, Woj, thanks so much. Lots more to talk about on this over the next couple of days. Kevin Durant, James Harden, they played together before.
Right.
We've talked about the NBA is littered with talented teams who didn't win it all. What's the challenge here?
Well, I think the defensive end of the floor, and Jared Allen, who I was interestingly, as this was coming to fruition, was asking Steve Nash, and he sort of couched his answer. You've given away your best defensive piece. You've also lost your best athlete and perimeter defensive player in Spencer Dinwiddie. My question is, can they be elite on the defensive end? You've got 3 open roster spots, according to our expert Bobby Marks. How they fill, that's important.
There's only one thing that's certain, and that's it will be fascinating to see how it all comes about. Of course, we do have a game tonight as the Nets and the Knicks meet again for the first time this season. We'll have more on that when NBA Courtside continues.
James Harden in a blockbuster deal.
If an athlete says, I want out, you moving.
This is a massive deal. If you get Irving back, you have a 1-2-3, perhaps unlike we've seen in this league in the modern era.
What happens to James Harden in Brooklyn? He's not going to be the man. That is Kevin Durant's team.
It's going to be messy for the Brooklyn Nets, but ultimately stars win.